Thank you so much. And our next speaker is Dr. Leyla Sahin, FDA Deputy Director. Let me give you your slides. There you go. FDA Deputy Director for Safety in the Division of Pediatrics and Maternal Health. And thank you very much, Leyla, for coming. I have to look at that. So
all right, good afternoon, everybody. So I'd like to start off by thanking Sonia and the organizers of this meeting for the invitation to be here today. It's really exciting to be back in an academic setting. I don't often have this opportunity, so I'm really excited to be here. The last slide, I think that Annie showed, I think was a great segue to my talk with Frances Kelsey, having been, a medical officer at FDA and who really was a champion for safety. And so I think everybody at FDA really is inspired by Frances Kelsey, and we all kind of aspire to, to have the strength and the fortitude that she had to stand up for what she believed in and to be an advocate for safety. So I think that was a great segue. Okay, so as a federal employee, I am obligated to tell you that this presentation represents my personal views. So I don't want anybody to think that, I'm here, that what you hear today is the official position of the FDA. Okay, so the objectives of my talk are to provide a little bit of kind of high-level background information on drug development and how pregnant individuals fit in into drug development. I'm going to talk about FDA's efforts to advance pregnancy safety data collection, and then talk a little bit about a recent public meeting that we held on this topic. And some of our panelists, Sonia was there as a panelist, Krista was there as a panelist, and Lee was also there and really contributed to the conversation. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. So in terms of background, there are approximately 5.5 million pregnancies that occur in the US every year. And we know that pregnant individuals may need treatment for chronic conditions. So they may go into pregnancy having a chronic condition like depression or inflammatory bowel disease, et cetera, or they may develop acute conditions. These acute conditions may be related to pregnancy-related conditions like nausea and vomiting of pregnancy, or they may develop acute conditions like the rest of us, like the general population. They may develop influenza or urinary tract infection, et cetera, and need to be treated. So unfortunately, pregnant individuals have been left out of drug development trials. And we just heard an excellent talk from Annie, who kind of talked about what the challenges are related to including pregnant individuals into clinical trials. And so what happens is that FDA approves drugs, and these drugs are approved for adults in the adult population. But I also want to make sure that you all understand that these products are also approved for use in the pregnant population. So there's often a misunderstanding. And when you have conversations with people, people will say, oh, well, this medication is being prescribed off-label to pregnant individuals. But I just want to clarify that that's not the case. So I think people think about pediatrics. So for pediatrics, there is a different regulatory pathway. When products get approved in the general adult population, they're not approved for use in pediatrics. And so companies then have to conduct additional studies in the pediatric population to then get an approval for that product to be used in pediatrics. But it's not the situation for pregnancy. So the default situation is that most drugs are approved with only animal data, only non-clinical reproductive toxicology data. And we know that it's really, really difficult to translate those study results to humans. And so that's why it's really important that we get human data to inform, the drug labeling. and to inform clinical care. So in terms of how pregnancy safety is assessed through the drug life cycle, in the pre-marketing phase, the vast majority of clinical trials require females of reproductive potential to be using contraception. But interestingly enough, there are often pregnancies that occur inadvertently during those clinical trials. And so that information can help inform the safety. But of course, the numbers are not going to be enough to really include in the product labeling at the time of approval. We heard that pregnant individuals are rarely included in clinical trials pre-approval. So then the pharmaceutical companies submit their new drug application to FDA for review. FDA reviews all the safety data related to pregnancy and then puts whatever information is available into the product labeling. And so all of the activity related, most of the activity related to pregnancy safety occurs in the post-marketing phase. So once the drug is on the market, then you start to accumulate case report series, real-world data, and sometimes some clinical trials. So some of the data sources for pregnancy safety in products that are approved come from case reports and case series. FDA has what's called the FAERS, the FDA Adverse Event Reporting System, where anybody, any consumer, healthcare provider, any person can submit a report to the FDA, and FDA regularly reviews those adverse events to try to identify any imbalances. Similarly, you can also submit reports to the manufacturer, and they also look for imbalances. Another commonly reported safety assessment is by astute clinicians. So these are healthcare providers who notice when they're examining newborns that they start to notice a pattern of birth defects in the infants that they're examining, and they will submit these reports into the medical literature. And in fact, some of the major teratogens, that we're aware of today, like thalidomide, isotretinoin, and mycophenolate, were actually identified in this way. And then, of course, we have real-world data. So real-world data is data that is accumulated in the course of regular clinical care. And so these can then be used to conduct studies. And so once they become studies, and then we consider that real world evidence. So this can be in the form of pregnancy registries, database studies, case control studies. These are often conducted by pharmaceutical companies, by academic investigators, or others like CDC has been mentioned, et cetera. So FDA's current strategy is at the time of a new drug approval, FDA makes a determination as to whether there's a need for pregnancy safety data, and then we'll issue post-marketing requirements. So this is the current strategy to issue two types of post-marketing requirements, one for a pregnancy registry and one for a database study. So in terms of efforts that FDA has been involved in to advance pregnancy safety data collection, FDA published a guidance on post-approval pregnancy safety studies in 2019, and this guidance discusses how these various methodologies, pharmacovigilance, pregnancy registries, studies relying on electronic healthcare data, and descriptive studies, how they all form like an important piece of the puzzle or important piece of the pie, and they all come together to inform pregnancy safety in the post-approval setting. Sonia mentioned some of the limitations and advantages of various study designs, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that, but I'll just mention that pregnancy registries are valuable because you directly enroll pregnant women into the study who are already being prescribed a medication by their healthcare provider. So you have direct access to the pregnant individual who can give you a lot of really important clinical information For example, she can tell you exactly what medication she's taking, at what gestational age in pregnancy, the dose of her medication. She can provide you with all of the covariate data that are important to assess. And then she's followed to the end of her pregnancy, and then you have confirmation of the outcome of the pregnancy. So you have access to the medical records, so you can do a really good evaluation as to whether there was a birth defect and get the medical records and the detailed information about what that birth defect was. The disadvantages of pregnancy registries are that it requires a lot of awareness. So you have to be involved in efforts for recruitment, enrollment. And because of that, unfortunately, pregnancy registries end up having smaller sample sizes and they take a long time to conduct. The other type of study that FDA has been issuing as a post-marketing requirement are these database studies. And the advantages of database studies is that they can potentially be done quicker. You have access to a larger sample size. But on the other hand, some of the limitations are that there are some uncertainties because you don't have direct access to the pregnant individual. And so you're relying on pharmacy dispensing. So you're correlating whether she took the medication or not with a dispensing at the pharmacy. So you don't really know if she took the medication, you don't know when she took the medication, you don't know the dosing and so forth. So there's uncertainties. And then in terms of outcome validation, there's uncertainties related to the ICD codes that are used to document those malformations. There's also some uncertainty related to algorithms that are developed to look back and define the pregnancy start date and then correlate that with when the dispensing occurred to try to figure out when she took the medication, et cetera. So there's no ideal study design. They all have kind of some disadvantages and some advantages. So for situations where exposure in pregnancy is expected to be uncommon, there's a potential role for a descriptive pregnancy safety study. The previous terminology that's in the current guidance is a pregnancy surveillance program. So this is a situation where either a pregnancy registry or a database study is probably not going to be adequately powered to conduct a comparative analysis. And so this is a situation, for example, when a drug is approved for a rare disease indication, or there's strong language in the labeling that either says, has a warnings or advises against use in pregnancy based on the animal reprotox studies. So this type of study is a systematic collection of pregnancy-specific data. It includes both prospective and retrospective data collection. And sometimes we see these being conducted as part of a rare disease registry. So they do a sub-study collecting data on pregnancy outcomes. So in terms of, how to expand data collection where you're thinking about a small sample size, some innovative methods include expanding the study population to outside the US and adding additional databases. And you all heard about the example that Sonia gave with her recent publication where they looked at diabetes drugs in pregnancy, and this is what they did. They went outside the US, they expanded, they had added several databases, and they were able to get, an incredibly large sample size of exposed pregnant individuals to various diabetes drugs. So we recently held a public workshop on September 18th and 19th on optimizing the use of post-approval pregnancy safety studies. This was a commitment under the Prescription Drug User Fee Amendment Act, what we call PDUFA 7. And the goals of the workshop were to bring together all of our stakeholders and to try to get input on the development of a framework for FDA to optimize post-approval pregnancy safety studies. And then to also get input on some proposed demonstration projects. And all of this, the reason that we did this is because we all know that doing work in this area is very, very challenging. And I think probably the most challenging reason is because the sample size is lower compared to, the general non-pregnant population, but also Sonia also talked about, some of the other challenges, why it's so difficult to do safety studies in pregnant individuals. So that was the point of having this 2-day workshop, was to discuss all these challenges and try to kind of brainstorm to give FDA advice on how to move forward in this field. So basically it was, this commitment is that FDA is going to develop a framework that is going to describe how different types of post-marketing pregnancy safety studies could optimally be used, incorporating, all of our knowledge of these different types of study designs, the experience that FDA has had, that industry has had, and then try to come together with providing input on this framework. So the framework would address the use of pregnancy registries, these database studies, and also FDA has its own database called the FDA Sentinel system that FDA has been working to expand to be able to do some pregnancy safety work. So considering all of these to try to come up with kind of a framework for the future. So there is ongoing work. FDA committed to publishing a workshop report by September 2024. 5 demonstration projects, and then in the end, by the end of 2027, FDA committed to publishing a map or a guidance that kind of describes this framework. So some of the key takeaways from the public meeting. So in terms of some of the presentations that were done by FDA based on some of the reviews that FDA did to present at the public workshop. So FDA did a review of pregnancy labeling updates under the pregnancy and lactation labeling rule between 2015 and 2021, looking specifically at pregnancy labeling that had quantitative human data. And this review showed that the most common source of data for pregnancy labeling is actually pregnancy registries. And the antiretroviral pregnancy registry, which is a disease-based pregnancy registry where multiple pharmaceutical companies come together. They all manufacture different antiretroviral drugs, but they all come together and support and fund this antiretroviral pregnancy registry. The FDA review showed that this particular pregnancy registry provided the most quantitative data in pregnancy labeling. And so this is interesting because, the use of antiretrovirals is not that common compared to, for example, more common conditions that occur in pregnancy. But I think that this highlights the value of disease-based registries and how when there's high awareness and healthcare providers and patients are engaged, they are then willing to contribute their data to a pregnancy registry. Most post-approval studies that have been required up to this date by FDA are pregnancy registries, but the new shift in policy of asking for 2 different study designs, that's a more recent trend. So that's why we haven't seen as many database studies that have been issued more historically. So I guess the next bullet is, quite unfortunate finding is that it actually took on average 11 years from the approval of the drug when the post-marketing requirement was issued for a pregnancy safety study to then complete the study and then actually include that data in labeling took 11 years after approval. So I think we have a lot of work to do. And then FDA's own Sentinel system, shared some of their data and showed that there was low utilization, unfortunately, for most drugs in pregnancy. And so we also received a lot of great input from our stakeholders. And so some of the key takeaways from our stakeholders is that, FDA is looking to develop a framework to try to identify what the best study design is. But we heard from our stakeholders, that there's really no optimal study method, that they all kind of have their own strengths and weaknesses, and they all they come together and they complement each other. They work together in a complementary fashion. And so, and then related to database studies, we know that there's been a lot of advancements in terms of developing advanced methods and algorithms, but what continues to remain is, the greatest challenge is that there's still, low exposure in pregnancy. So that still continues to be a challenge. One of the recommendations that we received was maybe there's a role for feasibility assessment for database studies. So once a drug is approved, maybe there should be some lag time to see if that drug is going to be used, if there's going to be uptake in the market, and if it's going to be used commonly in by pregnant individuals. And then maybe a few years down the road after approval, looking at utilization trends. And then if we see high utilization, then maybe then move to actually doing, the full database study with the comparative analysis. So this is something that we're taking into consideration. And then the last point is that there was a lot of interesting discussion on interpreting and communication of pregnancy safety data, especially when the data are limited. If there's conflicting results, then how do you, as a public health agency, right? What's our responsibility to communicate findings to the public and so forth. So this is the end of my talk. So in summary, we all recognize that pregnancy safety data collection is an important public health issue. There's a need for innovative approaches to optimize the conduct of these studies in the post-approval setting. And we all need to work together. We all need to collaborate to move this field forward. So thank you for your attention.